A Boy and the Pirate Prince, Book 1, written by Matthew Korak. Episode 3, Uncomfortable Memories. Four. The family sat outside the wooden hut, sans their father. The sun had been down for some time, and the night chill had crept back into the land. They sat cross-legged around a smoldering fire of dried manure, leaning forward to feel the feeble heat given off. Each member shared a blanket with another, save Bijan. The family's oldest stood away from the family, shivering from the cold, staring at the light glowing from the homestead's windows. "Come, Bijan, sit next to us," his mother said, draped in woolen blankets, cradling the newborn close to her breast. "It is cold, and we have a fire." "I wonder what they are doing in there," Bijan replied, disregarding her request. His father and the large man had been in the homestead for some time, since before sunset, alone. Bijan's eyes scanned past the home to where he could see the caravan camped in the distance. A small, dancing campfire, the only clue to its existence. "Your father is most like bartering with the man," his mother purred, "trying to get trade for things we need. You need not worry. Your father knows best. Now come and sit by the fire so as to not catch a cold." Asal, who sat across the fire from her mother, stirred in her blanket, which was wrapped around her shoulders and over her head. Only her nose and eyes were visible underneath the green woolen wrap. "Is father getting us food, mother?" The other siblings perked up, and several repeated the question. Their mother smiled and readjusted the blanket to better cover her infant. "Shh, now, children. He is in palaver with the caravan's leader. I do not know what they speak of, but your father always keeps his family in his heart. If there is anything to gain for the family, your father will pursue it." The caravan master had approached Bijan and his father on horseback. This immense man had asked for water and for permission to camp nearby. Father had given water and permission, though he had required they camp at great distance from the farm. The leader had thanked his father before making one more request. "It has been a long, hard journey. I seek to parley with you." The man, doubly huge on his horse, was a giant mass of white and creme linen, fine in its making, but worn from travel, sweat, and the sun. "My men will remain at camp, but I wish to share stories and wine with different company than the ones I currently keep." His father had agreed to the request and told the large man to return to the homestead after camp was set. As Bijan and his father walked away, Bijan had wondered aloud. Was this the blessing from God his father had referred to earlier, and would they be able to get things they desperately needed? Those questions were not answered, and now all Bijan could do was stand and wait, watching the homestead as the last remnants of twilight turned to night. His father had ushered the family out of the home when the caravan leader eventually came, and had told his menage to make shelter in the wooden hut. The interest that kept the siblings up was beginning to wear off, the call of dreams luring them to sleep. Their mother was aware of such things, as most mothers are, and had Farzina issue the marching order for bed. There was little argument, and soon it was only Bijan and his mother and babe outside. "For the love of God, Bijan, staring at home will not make things happen any quicker. Come sit down and relax." She pointed to one of the blankets left behind by the sleep-bound siblings. "Get warm and talk to me." Bijan did as he was bid, begrudgingly. As he sat, he threw a piece of dried manure on the fire pit and wrapped himself in the blanket. The fuel burned low, with barely a flame to be seen, but Bijan could see well enough. The full moon painted the landscape in a ghostly light. Bijan stared across the fire, knees pulled to his chest, arms warped around his shins. In the distance, he could hear the howl of a lone wolf. It is telling you to be weary and to not do anything foolish or hasty, his mother said, referring to the long howl. The lone wolf misses its pack and now sings its mournful song, warning those against making the same mistakes it made, the mistakes that led to its separation. It may be trying to tell you something, my love. She looked to her son, waiting for his answer. When he did not, she continued, Bijan, my dear, sweet boy, today, with your father, she said kindly, carefully choosing her words. You must learn to obey your father. Do not question him, especially in front of your siblings. Your father, he is stuck in his ways, but he knows best. Bijan ignored his mother, pushing past her words as one pushes past low-hanging branches. At this moment, he didn't care about the wolf, nor did he care about his mother's lesson. Those were not on his mind. The caravan leader was. That man, Bijan said, I do not like him. Why did he want to talk to father? To parley? That man is not blind. He can surely see we have nothing. It makes no sense. What are they up to in there? What does that man want? Bijan's mother shifted in her blankets, her voice tinged with annoyance. This is what I am trying to address with you, Bijan. Your father can handle this. He knows what to do here on the farm, how we will make our future, and how to address that man and any request he has. Do not concern yourself with it. Putting your nose into your father's affairs will only make matters worse. She changed the subject like a mother repositioning a fussy babe to stop it from crying. Why not tell me about your dreams, about being a warrior? The boy scowled, staring into the fire. Why? I will never be a warrior. I am a farm boy and will always be a farm boy. I will be here long after you and father are dead. So why pretend? Why even talk about it? Bijan stood up, a blanket still draped around his shoulders, the shoulders his father had called strong. There was no use. No, they are in the house, and I am stuck out here playing my role. Good night, mother. I am going to bed. And with that, he turned and went inside the wooden hut. Had Bijan known his future, he may have spent more time with his mother. Had he known the future, he may have woken his siblings and hugged and kissed them. Had he known the future, he may have walked the farm, touched the pomegranate tree, petted the mules. Had he known the future, he may have taken the pitchfork that was stored in the stables and driven it through the large man's neck. Had he known the future, Bijan may have done a great many things that night, for it was the last night he spent on his family's farm, the only place he had ever known his entire life. 5. The sun had not yet broken the eastern horizon when Bijan awoke. He sat up, careful to keep his rough blanket around his upper body, if only to fight off the pre-dawn chill. His feet hurt, but not as much as they had in previous days. He pulled his feet towards himself to massage them, the chain around his ankle rattling as he moved. His blisters were still there, but tougher now, more skin than fluid, on their way to becoming callous. Bijan grabbed his tunic, the makeshift pillow which he had slept on, and pulled it over his upper body. Looking across the dead fire pit that sat in the middle of the wagon circle, Bijan could see his keeper, Red Eye, asleep and snoring loudly. Sir Omar, Bijan whispered loudly at Red Eye. He dare not call him Red Eye to his face. Bijan had done that once before, in the presence of the other soldiers. They had laughed, and Bijan had received a beating from the prickly man. This morning, Red Eye did not stir to his name being called. Bijan called it again, to no avail. Bijan frowned. The morning routine for his new master was a busy one, and it was best if he could get an early start. Failure to be ready by the time the butcher wanted to leave would end in a whipping. Of all the things Bijan had experienced in his life, whipping had been the worst. Bijan had decided never to be scourged again, and would rather suffer a million other punishments than face the whip. That was no different this morning. Grabbing a rock, Bijan stood up and took aim at the snoring Red Eye. "Omar!" he yelled before flinging the rock. Years in the desert had taught Bijan and countless boys before him how to stave off boredom through the throwing of rocks. Bijan must have thrown thousands of rocks, stones, and pebbles in his time, and he had become quite good at it. His skill showed this morning, and the stone whipped through the air before pelting Red-Eye's blanket with a muffled thwap. Red-Eye flinched, and the ugly man's snore caught in his throat, setting him to a fit of coughing. The soldier shot up, jerkily looking around from side to side, searching for his assailant, hands grasping for the short sword that lay in its sheath next to him. "What in the hell?" Red-Eye said, baffled. He saw the stone on his bedroll and saw Bijan staring at him. The confusion that was painted across Red-Eye's face melted away, replaced with anger. "You little shit!" he yelled. The outburst rang across the flat desert, the other members stirring at the sound. Bijan kicked his ankle back and forth, sending the chains that bound him to clinking. "Unlock me," Bijan insisted. "I must tend to Jabbar. If I'm late, he will be angry with me." It was a gamble, throwing the rock and justifying the action by invoking the butcher. Mention of the butcher had the potential to lessen or stop any beatings Red-Eye may give. But the unceremonious wake-up could just as easily provoke a beating by the soldier. The butcher be damned. Still, any potential beating was better than being late to his morning duties. The butcher would accept no excuse for the caravan not being ready to leave at his convenience. Red-Eye stood and coughed, spitting a large glob of phlegm on the ground. The words he wanted to say simmered in his throat but did not bubble out. Bijan's gambit worked, and mention of the butcher kept Red-Eye's anger under its boiling point. "Aye, he'll know. He'll know you for the little bastard you are." He spat again, but did as Bijan had asked, roughly unlocking the boy's ankle iron. Unshackled, Bijan went about his morning routine, the same routine he had been doing since leaving his home, since being sold to the butcher. Men were fed, animals were fed, wagons loaded and secured. As the sun fully emerged from behind the eastern skyline, Bijan had finished his morning chores. And as he was finishing, the butcher had come out of the desert outpost, waving Bijan over. The boy did as he was bid, limping over to the butcher on feet that were sore, but not as tender as they were the previous day. "Leave these guardsmen 3 casks of red wine." The butcher had a look on his face similar to the look he had had when he emerged from the family homestead after the butcher had parleyed with Bijan's father. It was a look of deep satisfaction, the look of a man who had spent all night working towards an end that had come to fruition. "The good wine that I prefer. The red wine with the bumblebee painted on the side." Bijan went to his task, surprised at the butcher's request. The large man loved his wine and had made mention of the good wine several times. He would never give it away, nor trade it for a beggar's ransom. He must have gotten a good price for the wine, Bijan thought. These postmen are out here alone, probably desperate, just like we were. The butcher can command any price he wants. What could it be? But the butcher had walked away with nothing, as far as Bijan could see. His hands were empty, and nothing was being ferried from the outpost to the caravan. The last deal the butcher had made, he had walked away short a wagon and with a slave boy in tow. What had the butcher gotten out of these men? 6. The days were long and always to the north, the travel arduous and scorching. Over time, the hard-baked earth turned to sand dunes, and the once flat landscape began to roll. Vegetation became less sparse, with more and more grass sprouting in between the creases of the dunes. They occasionally passed travelers or abandoned settlements, but never stopped to parley or investigate. The road kept its form, gently curving to and fro, interrupted from time to time by drifts of sand. They trudged over the drifts with difficulty, wooden wheels getting swallowed by blistering earth. Several times, entire afternoons were spent digging out wagons. Despite these setbacks, they traveled forth undiscouraged, always northbound. Bijan's days were mirrors of each other, a revolving door of events that blurred together, never changing. Mornings, afternoons, evenings, all the same. Bijan struggling to feed the men, see to the animals, minding his duties, and walking. Always walking. And then there was the hunger. Hunger had been a part of Bijan's life since as far as he could remember. There were days on the farm where they would only eat one meal, usually a smattering of beans and a cup of milk. His insides would eat at him, his stomach aching in its hollowness, his mood sallow and fussy. But most of his days, while active, were spent standing still. Watching goats eat really only required a skin of water, a cloth to cover the head, and a rock to sit on. This hunger was different. The days spent trudging along behind the caravan had reduced his muscles to gravy. His stomach hurt, yes, but that did not compare to the feebleness he felt in his limbs, nor did it compare to the confusion he experienced in his mind. When he walked, he felt like falling over. When he listened to another person talking to him, he barely knew what they were saying. His life had become a dream, one that he had little control over, a nightmare that kept repeating itself. In the evenings, he fell into fitful sleeps, waking in the dark to ravenous knives of craving stabbing his belly. As he lay there nursing his stomach, rubbing it with his hands, the boy thought he was going to die. When I die, I can join my brother and sister and wait for mother, Bijan had thought one terrible night when his stomach felt as if it were going to split and his muscles felt as if they were melting off of his bones. And then we can all be together. That's all I want, to be with my family. The thought comforted him, but only for a moment. His brother and sister were dead, rotted in the dirt. They no longer existed, for only the power of a God could allow for souls and an afterlife. And how could there be a God when such suffering existed? No, if Bijan died, he would cease to exist as well. He did not want that. I can't die, Bijan decided, for if I do, I will never see my family again. It was a doppelganger mid-morning when the caravan arrived at a large settlement, a commune of considerable size and huge by Bijan's standards. The full moon was still in the cloudless azure sky, hovering above the horizon, fighting desperately to remain in the heavens. Bijan was walking with his head down in a dreamlike state of starvation and heard the settlement long before he saw it. When the first sound echoed above the dunes, Bijan looked up, cocking his head, trying to hear this strange new noise over the grinding wheels of the wagons. Soon the noise clarified into the unmistakable clangor of people. He could hear the calling of children, the bleating of goats, men shouting and women singing. His eyes followed the noise, and as he peered beyond the front of the caravan, he could see a collection of huts, kuchas, and pit houses in the distance, nestled and arranged to both sides of the desert road, some 30 in total. Rows of wooden and clay fences sectioned off large swaths of green and yellow vegetation, to which Bijan could see people working. The caravan traveled the road into the settlement before the butcher called a halt. The village denizens looked at the travelers. Some continued about their business. Others stopped to stare and gawk. Groups of children ran between the wagons, racing on dirty, bare feet, trying to get a better look at their visitors. Men stood at the ready, not yet decided on whether the caravan was a threat. Most went about their business. Others, women and elders, disappeared into homes. The scene alarmed Bijan and roused him from his waking dream. He had never been around this many people, and always was surrounded by desert. Here, amongst the dunes and structures, Bijan felt constricted, like a dog in a kennel that was surrounded by strange men. The noise made by the many people walking to and fro, pushing small carts, tending small herds of sheep, weaving between the huts and fences while at their duties set Bijan's heart racing in anxiety. With the caravan halted, Bijan let the habit of his duties take hold. He went to work, though he felt as if he were watching everything unfold from the outside looking in. He was walking, yes, but it felt like a dream. He untied the canvas and grabbed the staircase, but he could not feel the hard wooden planks underneath his fingers. He was a ghost, watching himself tend to the butcher from afar. He saw himself dodging Red-Eye, putting the staircase under the butcher's horse, and holding the horse's reins. He saw two elderly men approach the butcher, calling to him, hands raised in a conciliatory gesture. He saw the butcher answer back, though Bijan did not know what was being said. He watched the butcher dismount down the stairs, smoothing his tunic and cloak out, wiping the sweat from his brow. And then, strangely, and not to what Bijan would have predicted, he saw the butcher reach out and grasp the boy by the shoulder. The touch of the large man awoke Bijan from his daze, and suddenly he was back in his body. "Give the animal and the staircase to one of the men," the butcher commanded. "Tell them to hold fast here while I parley with these fine gentlemen." He pointed at the two men, both dressed in white thobs, both gray in the beard. "You will join me." Bijan was surprised, unsure if he had heard the butcher correctly. Why does he want me to go with him? Is this a trick? Bijan was nothing more than a servant, starved, beaten, subhuman. And now he wants me to tend him during palaver? What is the butcher going to do? Is he going to offer me up to these men, trade me away in the same fashion Papa did? Bijan stood, slow-witted and dumbfounded. The butcher scowled. "Now, I say, do not test my patience." Bijan hustled away, leading the butcher's horse with one hand, grasping the staircase in the other. To his relief, the first caravan member he encountered was a coachman. The driver was not pleased to be directed by Bijan, but hearing the grumbling of the coachman was far better than having to deal with the sour Red-Eye or Reza. Handing the lead and staircase over to the muttering man, Bijan returned to the butcher's side, who was still standing in the road, talking with the two elderly men. As the boy sidled next to the butcher, one of the elderly men pointed towards a pit house some 30 paces away, a whitewashed dome sitting low to the earth. "Please follow us," the elder said. "Never stand in the sun when it isn't needed, and it is not needed to talk. We will seek shelter." "Aye," said the other elder, and the two of them turned, walking towards the pit house. The butcher and Bijan followed closely. The colony's inhabitants watched from afar as the elders led them to the doorway of the structure. The old men walked down the 5 steps that marked the entrance and disappeared into the building. The butcher followed, ducking his head to avoid hitting the top of the entryway with Bijan in tow. As Bijan descended into the pit home, a draft of cool air tickled his skin and was a refreshing change to the sweltering heat of the desert. It was dark inside, with only the sunlight from the entrance illuminating the interior. And though the house only stood 5 feet when standing from the outside, the roof was high enough inside that even the butcher could stand. The floor was hard-packed earth, and in the center was a table that sat low to the ground. It was surrounded by large cylindrical pillows of faded red and green wool. "Please, sit," one of the elders said, pointing to the pillows on the floor. They did as bid, though the butcher had a hard time with the request, his mass complicating the process. Soon, all 4 were sitting on the ground and using the pillows as a backrest, legs straight out in front of them, underneath the table. Once seated, the elders introduced themselves. "I am Jabbar," the butcher said after they had finished their introductions, "and this is my servant, Bijan." They talked, the 2 men and the butcher. Bijan paid little attention, but was alert enough to know they were exchanging news and pleasantries. At one point, Bijan fell asleep, only to awake as the 2 elders were standing to take their leave. When the butcher knew they were alone, he turned to Bijan, his dark eyes grabbing the boy. "You fell asleep," the butcher said. "That is not acceptable. Do not do that again while you are in an audience with me." He paused, examining the boy with shrewd eyes, his face glistening with sweat. "Your father said you were strong, but I am beginning to doubt his claims. You are growing more feeble and pathetic. I cannot have that." Bijan froze, fearful he was in trouble. His mind raced for reasoning, how to explain that his deteriorating condition was not his fault. He did everything the butcher asked and had paid the price every time he hadn't. How could this be his fault, getting skinnier, getting weaker? And yet, it would be his fault. It was always his fault, just as it had been his fault for defending his younger brother. His entire life he had done everything his father had asked, all the chores and duties and tasks, and still it had been his fault. Why would it be any different here? Bijan's thoughts drifted to the last day on the farm, to his father in his cold loathing. On that last day at his home, in front of the homestead, through tear-shot eyes and on his knees, Bijan had pleaded with his father. Why was he doing this to him? What had he done to displease him so? Bijan was sorry for doubting him. He would never do it again, he promised. Don't send him away, not with the fat man. He would do anything his father said, as long as he could stay with the family. His father had looked sick with disgust, leering at Bijan as if he were an insect, a malformed animal that the patriarch could not stand the sight of. "Son, you have prayed for this, and God has answered," he had said. "You may not know it, but I see it through your actions. You do not want to be here, nor do you want to play your role." His father grabbed Bijan by the shoulder and pointed at the family who was huddled, weeping. "You want to be the hero? You want to leave them to find gold and treasure? Leave to pursue a fool's errand, delusions of grandeur? Fair enough. You can go on a grand adventure, and it will indeed bring a bounty upon this family." The master's voice brought him out of his head and back to the present. "Perhaps the fault lies with me. I paid quite a bounty for you, you know. 1 wagon, 2 mules, a bag of coppers, other various sundries. A man who does not see to the maintenance of his cart or the care of his animals has only himself to blame when they fail." He paused again. He spoke almost as if he were speaking with himself, musing through a problem. "You are not eating enough. Yes, that is it. You are smaller now than you were before," he said, sweat running down his face. He used the headcloth hanging over his neck to mop up the moisture. "Your father told me that your family had little to eat. I assumed that the fare I am providing you would be enough. It seems that it is not enough." "I want you to double your rations," the butcher said. "While you slept like a moron boy, I bargained a trade with these villagers. We will have enough food to get us to the sea. And once we make it to the sea, well, that is just the beginning. I will need you strong for the coming journey." "More food? What journey? Where are we going?" "North is where we are going, always north." For a moment, Bijan thought he had spoken his thoughts, but realized he had only thought them when he saw Jabbar looking at him queerly. Seeing that Bijan was not going to answer, the butcher continued, "We will reach the sea in a moon's turn. From there, we will sell all the things we do not need." The butcher cut his words off as 3 women came into the hut, each bearing trays of water, bread, and milk. The bread was freshly made, and the smell wiped the fog from Bijan's vision and set his dry mouth to water, bringing him out of his dreamscape. The butcher signaled to them, asking them to place the fare on the table. "Please, more bread for the boy, if you would be so kind." One girl nodded, a short, skinny girl of early teens, dark-haired and blue-eyed. Once the plates were set, she hurried the others out of the room. The butcher grabbed a loaf of bread, tore a chunk from it, and popped it in his mouth. "Eat," Jabbar commanded. This and anything else they bring will all be eaten before we leave this home." Bijan did as he was commanded, nodding his head in agreement. "Yes, Master Jabbar," he said as his fingers instinctively grabbed one of the loaves and tore it apart. He shoved a chunk into his mouth, chewing vigorously. "It is nice to have something other than salted beef, yes?" The butcher did not wait for an answer. "As I was saying, once we reach the port, we will sell what things we have that we will not need. Some of my belongings I will keep, but the animals, wagons, and sundry will be sold." He paused his speech to pour himself a cup of milk, quaffing it before tearing off another chunk of bread and ripping at it with his teeth. Bijan watched the butcher and chewed, tearing more chunks of bread and throwing them into his mouth. Following suit, he poured a glass of milk and used it to wash the bread down. The bread was warm and nutty and tasted like nothing he had ever eaten before. He could feel his life returning to him. But even as the feeling of nourishment flooded his body, the goat's milk invited memories of home. His thoughts went unbidden to his mother, though his memory would not let him think of her as he had known her, a warm, handsome, dignified woman. Now his memory of her was how she was in the last, a desperate mother fighting back insanity at the loss of her child. It had been a terrible sight to behold, the last time Bijan had looked at his mother. The family standing in front of the homestead, the butcher shaking Bijan's father's hand, his mother losing control of herself in front of all the world to see. Bijan had been on his knees before his father, begging for him to allow him to stay, his thin voice carrying across the farm and into the desert. From the homestead entrance, Bijan's mother came running out, followed by his brothers and sisters. She wailed and went to her husband, groping at his clothing, pleading, "No, no, 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 no! You cannot do this. Please, my love, not my son, not my firstborn." His father did not acknowledge her, brushing her off as a man brushes off a fly. He walked towards Bijan, pointing towards the fat man. "You will go with him. You are his charge now. You will obey all he says." His brothers and sisters, grouping together instinctively, began to cry. What is happening? Where is Bijan going? Why was he going with the fat man? And if you fail to do so, he will be less forgiving than I am. The morning air was filled with the sounds of sobbing and crying, but his father's voice still rang above it all. The large man grabbed Bijan by the arm, pulled him to his feet, and began to drag the struggling boy towards the caravan. Bijan's mother came at his father shrieking, eyes alight with a crazed glow that burnt like embers. "You will not take him. He is only a child. Do not forsake him for questioning you. Are you so feeble you would throw away blood to rid yourself of self-doubt?" The patriarch turned, an open hand flying through the air. With a loud smack, Bijan's mother fell, her head jerking to the side at the impact, crimson welling from her lip. She made a soft grunt, putting a hand to her face as if to check if it were still there. As she lay on her back, cradling her face, a chorus of wails and sobs and screams erupted from the huddled group of siblings. Bijan thought he had known anger in his life. His siblings had made him angry from time to time, as younger brothers and sisters are wont to do. The goats could make him angry when they were ornery and did not want to listen to his commands. The mules had made him angry before, their refusal to run free. But those feelings paled in comparison to what he felt now, fire and blood and death. "I'll kill him!" Bijan's mind screamed, and then he saw red. Bijan ripped away from his captor and ran at his father, fists clenched, spit flying from his mouth as he screamed. He flashed across the sand, a meteor of righteous fury, the warrior incarnate. He would defeat this enemy, he would save his family, he would kill his father. He struck his father, leaping through the air like a jaguar fiend, arms outstretched to tackle and bring his foe low. He hit his target, his aim true, and had no effect. His father stood above him, barely moved, and pushed his son away, his large hands more than enough to quell Bijan's assault. Bijan peered up at him, his face streaked with tears, his teeth clenched. His father looked at him with disgust. Bijan attempted to hit his father again, but his strength was failing him. He is too big, I am too small. I am powerless. Keep eating, the butcher said as he adjusted the pillow that supported his back. He threw a chunk of bread at the boy. With the coin made from our trade, the butcher continued, small chunks of bread falling from his mouth as he spoke, I will pay the men their remaining wages and release them. Then we will buy passage north. Bijan obeyed the butcher's command and ate a large morsel of bread, chasing it with a gulp of milk. The portion of bread was big enough to hurt as it went down and caused Bijan to cough. Flushing his throat with another swig of milk, he regained his composure. Master Jabbar, forgive me, but what do you mean by passage north? That means we will buy a place on a ship to take us across the sea to a new land, the butcher said. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, the look of a small epiphany passing on his face. I forget, you have never looked upon the ocean. You probably do not know what a ship is either. Do not fret, you will see what I mean soon enough. But Bijan did know of the sea, and he did know what a ship was. He wants to leave this land, he thought. But if we leave, how will I see my family again? Despite all that had happened, deep down, Bijan believed he would one day see his mother and siblings again, even his father. If he left with the butcher, that possibility would be lost to him. Master Jabbar, how long will it take to travel to this new land you speak of? And how long will we be there before we return? The butcher sniffed. We won't be returning. The boy's heart sank. The vision of his mother on the ground, crying. Was that really to be the last time he would see her? His brothers and sisters crying, surrounding her, his father looking on, the wind grabbing his hair, a look of cold disconnect and disgust in his eyes. Was that the lasting memory? And his mother crying, and his mother sobbing and screaming and bleeding and crying. Tears formed in Bijan's eyes, and he fought to keep them from running. He lowered his head, if only so the butcher could not see his tears. This was not how it was supposed to be. He should not, would not be separated from his family like this. Bijan would make it to his mother one day. He would find her. He would save her from the tragedy of losing her son, losing Bijan. And his father, well, Bijan did not know what he would do if he saw him again. But all of that would be impossible if he steps foot aboard the ship Jabbar intends on boarding. He can't let that happen. He can't board that ship. In his mind, the food lifting the fog of waking dreams, he could now see clearly what he had to do. There was only one course of action he could take to ensure he would see his family again. Bijan would escape. This was episode 3 of A Boy and the Pirate Prince, Book 1, a series telling the hero's journey of Bijan and how he met the Pirate Prince. Join us next episode as we join Bijan in his bid to escape the butcher's caravan and find his way home to his family.